Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 21st day of March in the year of our Lord, 2025. There are many things I could have been talking about, things like tariffs, taxes, and so forth, but I have to talk about the subject I hate the most, that is war, which seems to be almost everywhere today. The partial ceasefire in Ukraine, the wide open fire now in Gaza, and the U.S. war in the Red Sea/Gulf of Aden and Bab-el-Mandab against the Houthis. War shapes the world order. I guess it always has. For example, the military defeat of Napoleon in 1814 led to the Congress of Vienna, which cemented Great Britain as the leader of the new world order instead of France. I suppose since those countries controlled the world, it would be okay to call that a world war, resulting in the new order which existed until World War I, or about 1914. The victors in World War I set the order with the formation of the League of Nations, which totally collapsed when Germany decided that it would be a better leader of the world than Britain. The victors in World War II formed the new order with the United States as its leader and the United Nations to cement the order permanently. The Soviet Union, which was one of the victors in World War II, didn't accept the U.S. as world leader, and that resulted in a 40-year-long struggle for a new world order, which became the Cold War. The end of the Cold War brought an end to the Soviet Union, which dissolved into the Russian Federation. The global elite, the ruling elite of the world, had to find a way to continue the struggle, to feed the eternal death machine that is war, so the conflict between NATO and Russia continued. We won't move 1 inch closer to Russia, Reagan told Gorbachev, but the later presidents reneged on that promise. The struggle continued. NATO was formed out of the shared belief among the nations that the Soviet Union was a direct threat to Western Europe, and so an alliance pledging together that if one were attacked, it would be considered an attack against all was formed. The colonial possessions of the members were to be accepted from that deal, as the French still possessed Vietnam, or Indochina as it was known then. That agreement didn't change much over the years. New countries were added, but the world order remained in a post-World War II state of mind, with the United States growing ever stronger militarily, Europe growing ever weaker. Europe was fine with all that because all those countries could let their militaries deteriorate since the U.S. had their backs. The Europeans did not even live up to the paltry, relatively speaking, 5% on defense that NATO agreement called for. The U.S. constantly urged them to spend more, but why should they? Because the U.S. nuclear umbrella was there to cover them. Donald Trump appeared on the scene, started America First rhetoric, exposing the obvious, that the NATO agreement and the way it was enforced was extremely unfair to the U.S. The Europeans were stuck, have continued to be stuck, in a 1939 mindset which told them the Russians are coming. But the Russians never came. They wanted to constantly poke the bear, but they had nothing with which to defend themselves against the bear. The U.S. wanted a unipolar world, with the U.S. at the head of it, and the Europeans were fine with that also, as long as they could spend their tax revenue on their welfare and other social relief programs to pacify the masses. In the meantime, the U.S. and its people languished under the ever-increasing weight of $36 trillion of debt, increasing by $2 trillion per year. The weight of constant wars, constantly increasing burdens, wounded veterans to care for, the people becoming ever more impoverished, the middle class driven into poverty and into unpayable debt. Now I'm taking a little poetic license here, folks, speaking for Donald Trump, but I think it went something like this. Trump takes office having already looked at the world and seen the order. He said this is grossly unfair and must be changed because we are slowly dying. The new world he saw involved Russia and the U.S. exploring their common interests rather than fighting. The Soviet Union broke apart because the Soviets could no longer afford to maintain it. Their people were impoverished, with a majority as hopeless alcoholics and life expectancy in the Soviet Union plummeting, Reagan and Gorbachev worked it out. The rest you know as history, although many prefer to lie about that history, about what the agreement actually said. It was all recorded. Trump insisted he could work with Russia to find common ground. Total war today, which has always reshaped, redefined world order, is unthinkable because it would mean Armageddon for the world, so something else has to be found to fight about, to jockey for leadership in the world, trusting the world to fight wars, giving one the power to dictate economic terms. Works to a degree, but only if China, Russia, the U.S., all NATO countries, all Middle East countries, they all have leadership that is sane and remains that way year after year. Are we willing to bet our lives and the lives of our prodigy on that assumption? Why not redefine the world order in economic terms instead? I think that is what Trump is hopeful of doing. I realize that I am not in the White House. I can't know fully what is happening outside of my own research and study, but having said that, I will also say that I disagree with the way the ceasefire negotiations were conducted. The war is a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia, with the U.S. trying to use Ukraine as a battleground to weaken and eventually break up Russia, leaving the U.S. unchallenged in a unipolar world. It didn't work out. Instead, it had the opposite result, with Russia growing much stronger, Putin modernizing his army, consolidating his rule. This war would not and could not have been fought without the full commitment, at least economically, by the U.S. Therefore, the negotiations should be between the U.S. and Russia, not Trump and Zelensky. The Russians certainly see it as a war between them and the U.S., so why not acknowledge that? Try to work it out so that Putin can go back to his people and say, look, folks, look at what we gained. All the sacrifice was worth it. The U.S. and Zelensky can go back to their people and say, look at what we gained. You will see that Russia got some formerly Ukrainian territory, but not nearly as much as it wanted and tried to get, so we won. This is very reminiscent of the position that the United States was in with regard to South and North Vietnam. The end became a foregone conclusion. Years of negotiating were conducted over prisoners and how to explain the inevitable victory of the North. Everybody goes home a victor. But out of all the death and destruction comes a new order for the world. It would be a tacit, if not overt, admission to say that the age of the unipolar world is over. The project for a new American century was a complete failure, only accomplished the slaughter of millions, the impoverishment of even more. The new order of the world will apparently have the U.S., Russia, China, as multipolar countries in this world of massive egos and lunatic ambitions. Is there room in this world for all three? Time will tell, I guess, but I pray that there is. Now let me mention some of the other wars that are at the disposal of Donald Trump in the second month of his administration. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas/Gaza is no more. It was obvious from the beginning it would not work because neither side wanted it to work. My guess is if you search the world over, you would not find a place with a higher population of insane lunatics than in the Middle East. Hamas could have allowed the ceasefire to continue by simply releasing the remaining hostages or the bodies of the hostages. What good are the hostages to Hamas anymore? They obviously have not deterred Israel from its attacks. So the Israelis mobilized 400,000 troops and began another attack on the rubble that is now Gaza. Hundreds are already dead. Once again, most of them women and children. To think those civilians in Gaza deserve what they have gotten or that they have any way to control Hamas is foolish and heartless. Why are the Israelis still bombing Gaza and sending in more soldiers? It can't be because of the hostages, because that makes no sense. It must be because they are tired of the constant attacks by Hamas on their civilians and their infrastructure, and they intend to put a stop to it once and for all. The other possibility is more sinister, and that is the territorial expansion of Israel in the same region of the world, and in a war based on the war between Gaza Against Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen started their attacks against shipping once again, shipping trying to exit or enter the Red Sea. They explained to the world that the attacks were in retaliation for the Israeli attacks in Gaza and the blockade to prevent humanitarian relief from reaching Gaza. They attacked the aircraft carrier Harry Truman and its battle group with 19 missiles and drones. The U.S. Navy swatted them aside like they were flies with no problem at all. Then Trump ordered a bombing attack inside Yemen to teach those Houthis a lesson. Trump criticized Biden during the campaign for relying on bombing when, quote, a telephone call could be used much more easily, end quote. It's easier, I suppose. It's easier when you have your finger on the trigger. I'm afraid that some of the neocon war is the only answer. People have slipped into the foreign policy portion of the administration. We haven't exactly had successful foreign policy people in place during, say, the last 50 years. And so perhaps we should try something different. Perhaps someone should start communicating with the people honestly instead of spouting out the same propaganda that most of us have heard our entire lives. Maybe someone could come on board who is willing to re-examine the policy positions that have been in place, no matter which party controls the Oval Office. Finally, folks, if we are able to stop the killing in Ukraine, only to continue the killing in Gaza, start new killing in Yemen, what have we accomplished? Politics is not about finding peace. It's about finding excuses for war. So I suggest we start re-examining the world order and the politics that fuels it as well. At least that's the way I see it. Until next time, folks, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.